Wow. I don't know how you do that. I could never. That's what people say when they learn that I am a funeral director. I thought the same thing the day I met Miss Joan. She arrived just a couple of hours into my shift. My coworker and we slide her onto my table, and I unzip the bag. She was still warm to the touch, and at first glance, she seemed at peace. As we began to undress her, we noticed that her frail body was locked, bent tightly in a fetal position. Her arms, her legs, her head, just frozen in time. I wondered for how long she had been staring at the ceiling above her bed, unable to move, unable to tell anyone how she was feeling. And when I tried to loosen her limbs, nothing gave. I couldn't break her free from this position. Her fists were clenched so tightly that I can see her fingernails buried into the palms of her hands. And as I turned her over, the untreated bed sores were everywhere, on her hips, her shoulders, her back. I could touch the exposed bone, and I can smell the scent of slow decay just oozing from her warm, defenseless body. And as I began to unwrap the gauze that was covering her feet, live maggots come pouring out onto my table. I froze. I instinctively dropped her foot and took a step back in disbelief. I can feel this anger just boiling inside of me. How did it get to this? Maggots feasting on her necrotic tissue while she was still alive. That night, I went home and I stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red, shoulders heavy, my feet ache, and my soul just felt hollow. I cried for a long time in the shower. I cried for a woman who was a complete stranger to me. She wasn't someone I had an emotional connection with, but somehow her pain was now mine. I felt infected by it. At this point, the weight of the work was ruining my life. I began to withdraw from friends, from family, from joy, even from my son. I battled feelings of guilt, of anger, and resentment. The mirror reflected not just fatigue, but this quiet despair that I was feeling inside. I didn't know how to deal with such heavy feelings. I normalized it, which is what many of us who work close to tragedy and trauma often do. It's not just funeral staff. Think about doctors, nurses, first responders, social workers, members of law enforcement, members of the armed forces. Every day we bring home someone else's tragic story with us. I told myself, stop complaining, Vanessa. People die every day. This is normal. At the end of the day, I was able to pay my bills, raise my son Lucas as a single mom, and be independent. And so I powered through the aches and the demands. Because at the end of the day, I chose this path. I chose this career, right? But burnout isn't hard to spot. And my boss noticed. And so I was redirected to mentoring interns. Let me tell you, I felt demoted. But working with them turned out to be a breath of fresh air. It inspired me, and I began to consider and explore options that I hadn't before. And so one night, sitting on my bed in my Brooklyn apartment, my son was asleep at my side. And I emailed my resume to several firms around the world. To my surprise, a couple of days later, a message arrived in my inbox from Nepal. I had to read the email several times to actually believe it. And I yelled with excitement because this is where I needed to go. And with my parents' blessing, a suitcase in one hand, tears down my face, and a trembling heart, about 6 months later, I hugged my son Lucas tightly and I boarded a plane to the chaos and the colors of the Kathmandu Valley. It was here that I met Tenga Rinpoche, an 81-year-old respected Buddhist teacher. And my job was to embalm his remains in the privacy of his room and assist with the funeral preparations that followed. When I first laid my eyes on him, I remember thinking, I know death. I've seen thousands of bodies, but this is not death as I know it. Where was the odor? Where was the pale skin? Where was the empty feeling in the room? He remained in his room, undisturbed, during a mystical period the Buddhist community calls the state of Tukdam. His documented case lasted 3.5 days. I returned to the monastery once the state of Tukdam ended, and I saw that the natural timeline of decomposition did not apply to Tenga Rinpoche. Whatever it was, energy, spirit, presence, it lingered. I felt it, and it was a life-changing experience. It was as if consciousness didn't really leave. It simply became just quieter. It's been over a decade since his death. But just like Miss Jones' story, it has stayed with me forever. This eye-opening experience redirected my approach to the work that I do. In the West, we master logistics. We commercialize, institutionalize, monetize the process, and then we dispose of the body. We manage death. We are forced to desensitize ourselves from the process and are expected to return to work in 3 to 5 days. In Nepal, I saw no uncertainty or regrets. This wasn't a monetary transaction or a burden for anyone to carry. They didn't hide from it. They gathered around it and they sat with their feelings. They prayed, they honored, and they mourned a life well lived. There was an aura of peace and calmness around this man and the community that supported him that I hadn't seen or felt before. So what I learned is that sitting with death means seeing it not as a failure, but as a teacher, as an opportunity for spiritual realization, as a means of finding inspiration. As professionals who work with death, our work can help others in moments of trauma, grief, and despair. And this can be possible when we treat the dead and the grieving as more than just physical beings. Whether someone is dying, grieving, or simply struggling, we can choose to stand with them, not to fix, but to acknowledge their struggle and to lend them a hand when needed. I'm still the funeral director today, but after my personal encounters with death customs across countries like Nepal, India, and Spain, I am dedicated to transforming how we think about end of life. I invite you to turn your career into something sacred, to see that the work that you do can be spiritual in nature. Start with this. Before your hands touch someone in your care, say their name out loud. It is our way of saying you mattered. You still matter. I acknowledge you. It is a simple act that creates a space of respect towards someone entrusted to you, someone who is hoping that you will show them compassion, respect, and the dignity they were perhaps denied, as it happened with Miss Joan. Because death is not the opposite of life, it is the mirror that reminds us how precious living really is.